Hi
Hey,
guys. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me here.
it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and sorry for the collapse of the internet before your talk. Um, I wouldn't want to be a StreamYard engineer right now. It would have been I probably would have aged 10 years in one day. Um, but it's great you've made it, and so I'll just introduce Abubakar to everyone. So Abubakar is the CEO of Gradio. So this kind of cool applications that Merve just showed us, the kind of brainchild of Abubakar and his team. And in his role as the CEO of Gradio, he works on making machine learning models easier to demo, debug, and deploy. And today he'll talk to us about building machine learning applications fast. So I'll share the video and then we'll do a Q&A afterwards.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abubakar. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Gradio, and I'll be talking about how to build machine learning applications fast. Before I get started, a decade ago, Mark Andreessen famously said that software and software applications were eating the world. Fast forward to 2021, and it seems like machine learning applications are eating the world. This is a screen grab of Hugging Face Spaces, and you see all of these different machine learning applications and demos that were created and deployed on Spaces just over the course of 5 days. There are machine learning applications that span things like education, machine learning applications for entertainment, for productivity, art, being able to find things more easily, and even accessibility. So let's take a look at just a couple of these applications. So for art, this space was recently built by Asen Khalik. And what it does, it takes as input a photo, a realistic image, and it converts it to another image that is essentially the same image, but it's like a hand-drawn version of it. It's called AnimeGAN. And it basically does automated rotoscoping. This is really cool because something like this takes a lot of time for people to do manually. And now you have the ability for ordinary people taking their own photos, their own profile pictures, and creating art from those photos and from those pictures. So people, once we built and released this demo, we saw thousands of people across the world really using it on pictures of themselves, pictures of their babies, of their pets, and even ordinary objects. That's pretty cool. Machine learning here has the potential to bring artistic, ability and talent to anyone who has a particular vision of a type of art that they want to be able to create. Let's look at another application. This one has elements of productivity into it. So here there's a space that was built by Ben the Coder, and what it does, it uses machine learning models to take a news article. So you just put in the URL of a news article. It scrapes the content and it then summarizes it for you. It gives you a one paragraph summary. So for example, in this case, you have an article about AI powered hiring and kind of a summary of the bias that might happen as a result. That's quite interesting. And this is really powerful because again, it makes it a lot easier to consume content that might be very long. You have articles, you have pages, books, whatever you want to read. You can get summaries of it first, and then if you're interested, you can kind of dive more deeply. It makes it possible to consume a wider array of content. So the reason I bring all this up is because we're at a very interesting point in the usage of machine learning. Early on, it was academics and hackers that were using machine learning, and over time it became machine learning engineers, software engineers, people with some sort of dedicated expertise that were using machine learning, oftentimes in a business context. And now what you have is you have anyone who can use a GUI or a browser can now actually take advantage of machine learning again to create art or to learn things or to build productivity tools, to use these different models that have been created. It's super powerful, especially if you compare it. In many ways, it is parallel to the development of personal computing. In the early days of personal computing, you had really only maybe hackers that were very kind of on the cutting edge of technology that were using computers. Over time, it became more dedicated engineers, especially in business contexts, that were using it. And ever since the introduction of the original, maybe perhaps Apple computer with the GUI, the kind of a mass audience can take advantage of personal computing, and a mass audience certainly has taken advantage of personal computing. And the developments and the possibilities have been, I think, really unforeseen by anyone at that time. And we're at a similar stage with machine learning. And as kind of you can tell here, we went a long way from those early stages of of those GUIs. And I think the same is probably going to happen with machine learning as well. We're pretty much very much at the early days of this widespread adoption. So with that being said, I mean, given how much promise machine learning applications have, how do we actually build them? Well, it's not so bad. You just take your machine learning model that you've trained in Python, in TensorFlow or PyTorch or JAX, or maybe with a library on top like Hugging Face. You go from there, then you build a web application on top of that. You containerize it with Docker. You find a hosting solution like AWS. And then, of course, you want to build an interactive user interface so a lot of different people can use it. So you learn some web scripting, you put together a little GUI, and then people are using it, people are submitting data. You might want to store that so you can see how the model is doing and improve it. So you build a MySQL database. So all of that is needed just to build a machine learning application. Or at least it used to be. Now we have much better solutions, particularly if you want to build machine learning applications fast. We at Gradio have abstracted away a lot of these different steps. Deploying your model, building a GUI, storing incoming samples, all of that can be done with Gradio. And the beauty of it is it's all done in Python, which is a language we machine learning engineers use and love. So how does this actually look? Well, let me show you a practical example. And I won't go too much into like a tutorial around Gradio. There's lots of resources online if you're interested in that. But I just want to give you kind of a taste of it. So you go ahead and you import Gradio because Gradio is a Python package. Then you instantiate a Gradio.interface class. So this interface class is the core class in Gradio. And it takes in 3 arguments. The first argument is the function, the Python function, which is usually like a wrapper around a model that you want to deploy. And then the next 2 parameters are what kind of input and output you want. So in this case, I want a drag and drop image interface that feeds into my skin image classifier. The classifier returns a dictionary of confidences, of predictions, and that gets outputted as a label. So let's see what this looks like in practice. But before I show you what it looks like, I do want to mention that when you launch, you can write all of this code to create this interface and to launch it. And you can run this from any environment that you can run Python on. So you could run this from a Python terminal, for sure. You could run this from a Jupyter notebook, Jupyter Lab, or a Colab environment, even Kaggle or Replit. Anywhere you can run Python, you can run this, which is very powerful. And what you'll see is it'll go ahead and it'll create an interface like this. And this interface here, for example, you can drop in an image here and you can see the prediction. You can even edit it. And you'll notice this edit button over here. This allows you to adjust things like the brightness or the crop. And you can see how the predictions change in real time. So this 3 lines of code produces this interface here. Of course, you can modify things. We don't just support images or text. We support things like video, audio, input. We support as output HTML, JSON, files, all sorts of different things. So here's another interface that you could create around video GPT. So this is a model that you put in a video and it tries to predict the next frame of the video. So again, super easy to wrap an interface around that. If you want to build a more complex model that takes in multiple inputs or multiple outputs, that's also super easy. Just pass in a list of those inputs or a list of those outputs. And then again, same thing, just launch it and it creates this. Now you may be wondering where this application is running. And by default, it runs locally. So it runs in your local host and you can kind of, do everything locally and you can test it and your data doesn't go anywhere. But in many settings, you actually want to be able to share your model with somebody else. And so by just adding one parameter here, share equals true, what this does is this creates a public URL. You can see this here, 95338.gradio.app here. It creates a temporary public URL, which allows anyone to actually try your web application. No deployment. You don't have to worry about deployment or dependencies or anything like that. You can just pass this link around like a Google Doc link, and then someone else will be able to try out your model. This means you can take that model that you've built and you can share it with your users, with your collaborators, with your boss, with your teammates, with your parents, anyone who you want to be able to try out the model. And what they can do is they can, drag and drop in their own images and see what the prediction is like. Or if they're on their phone, the UI automatically adjusts to be mobile responsive. And instead of dragging and dropping an image, you can actually pick one from your gallery, or to use the phone camera to take one as well. And then just in real time, you can see the prediction. So this is really powerful. And of course, this applies to all the different kinds of UI components that we have. So this lets anyone try out a model immediately without having to worry about software dependencies, hardware dependencies, because your model continues to run locally. So the web UI gets deployed, but Gradio handles the message passing back and forth, meaning that the person on the other end doesn't have to worry about any dependencies or really even need any sort of technical expertise. They can just try out your model if they can open up a browser window. If you want more permanent hosting, we recommend trying out Hugging Face Spaces. That's the preferred kind of deployment solution. Hugging Face has made it super easy to deploy a machine learning model. And you can kind of see how that process looks like in this GIF. I won't go into the details here, but there's a great blog post on the Hugging Face website on how to deploy Gradio Spaces. And once your app is up on the Hugging Face Spaces, a lot of cool things happen. First of all, now you can actually use that demo that you've built or anybody else has built and put up on Spaces. You can use it like a function in your regular code. So that new summarization model I mentioned earlier, built by Ben the Coder, I can load it as a Gradio interface. Here I'm loading it just by passing in the Spaces path to it. And now I can then use it as a function. I can now summarize new links. Here I've had it summarize a CNN article on COVID. Okay, and of course you can do this with text in demos, but you can also do this with image demos by passing in the URL to an image or the file path to an image, or you can do this with video or audio or even multimodal by passing in different parameters corresponding to the different inputs. If there's a space up on Hugging Face Spaces that you like, if there's a demo that you like, but you want to tweak it a little bit to suit your use case, you can do that easily. So for example, here's a cool demo that removes the background from an image. I like that, but maybe I want to attach it to my webcam instead of a drag and drop image interface. Well, I can just add one parameter here that overrides the input to be a webcam. I launch it again, and now, hey, look at that. Now it's connected to my webcam, and I can now run it with my webcam and confirm that it works. Okay, you can also mix and match spaces. Now this is pretty cool. So that new summarization model, maybe I want to connect it to a model that translates from English to German. And so I can put them in series, and now, voila, I have a model that takes in a URL and converts it to a summary of that news article in German. So you can kind of see this here. So it's taken this AlphaFold article and it's summarized it and then converted it to German. So I can now put demos, put spaces in series or even in parallel to compare different things. And so you can read more about that on the Gradio website. But the biggest thing, of course, why build machine learning apps and why deploy them on Spaces? The biggest thing is it completely democratizes access to machine learning. Any of the 4.7 billion people connected to the internet, that's a huge number, can now use your machine learning model. What bigger way can we actually democratize the potential of machine learning than making our models, our applications accessible to the wider world? All right, with that, if you'd like to give Gradio a spin, you can pip install it, and then you can run some sample code that we've provided here, and you'll see that you'll be able to spin up an interface in no time. If you want to see more guides like this, then visit our website, www.gradio.app, and thank you very much. My name is Abubakar Abid. I'm on Twitter as Abid Labs, ABIDLABS. If you'd like to reach me, that's probably the best way. Or, of course, reach us through the website, the link that I just provided.
Great, welcome back.
Yeah, okay.
It was a really cool talk. It's nice to see this like high-level summary of kind of the motivation behind Gradio and also the cool like modalities and different applications.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think you have to actually have lived the pain of building your own application to really appreciate how amazing this is, because For example, I think my very first ML model was like wrapped in Flask. And I had no idea what like Flask was. I didn't even know what like web applications were. And, you know, this is kind of like not your domain really as an engineer. Well, I mean, maybe it is, but like, you know, you should really be focusing on the ML part, not the front end. And Gradio is, I think, really awesome for doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I've definitely lived the pain a lot. I think during my PhD, actually, several times I had to do this, and it's not just about the fact that it's hard. I think the fact that it's hard also prevents people from like making sure that their machine learning applications work in the real world as well. If that makes sense. Like, because people know that, okay, I can publish a model. It doesn't really have to work as long as it hits certain metrics. You know? But I think having this kind of making this the normal workflow. Okay, you've built a model, you're going to deploy it. I think make sure that a lot of issues that we talk about with bias and robustness actually get surfaced and then hopefully solved as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that's really like exciting is that, I mean, most of the time, the machine learning models that we build, they should ideally serve humans in some way.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of the time, the person who's interacting with the model, it really helps if you can do that, right? Because, you know, just showing like a table of like performance, you know,
exactly.
and stuff like this doesn't really excite anyone. And especially when you work in industry, like the end users who are often domain experts and so on, they really appreciate like being able to click buttons and like say, oh, not just like, does it work, but like I've experienced people doing adversarial attacks on my models.
Absolutely. No, I've seen that so often, actually. I remember the very first application of Gradio, which is, you know, where we built it. It was for a model that looked at these like ultrasound pictures of the heart, and it could detect different things, like if there is a pacemaker in the heart or whatnot. And I remember like we presented it to this cardiologist, and he was skeptical. Like, our numbers were very good, but he was skeptical. And then he like adversarially tested it. He like edited the pacemaker out of it, and then the prediction of the model changed, like from there's a pacemaker to there's no pacemaker. And when that happened multiple times, like the cardiologist was actually convinced, and even us, like the machine learning engineers in the room, we all breathed a sigh of relief. Because one thing to have like good numbers, but another thing, like when it's actually stress tested, it works. That's actually a really good thing. And I think that's kind of the other piece of it is, one, these GUIs, these demos reveal if there's issues of bias and robustness. But then also, like if it's actually a good model, it helps build trust in the model, which is of course very important in these kind of interdisciplinary machine learning applications. Yeah.
Awesome. So we've got a couple of questions I'd like to maybe ask. So one is here. So someone's asked, Gradio supports a lot of modalities like text, images, and video. What's the next focus for the team? So I don't know what's beyond the space of these three, but maybe you have some cool ideas.
Definitely. Yeah. So in terms of modalities, there's a few modalities we're looking at right now. For example, 3D images, a lot of fun work being done there. But kind of just more broadly speaking, there's a lot of like enhancements we're doing to the library, but the next big thing we're looking at is thinking about how to actually scale up Gradio demos, which are designed mostly for like single sample inference, like you put in one sample, you run it, to more fully fledged applications where you can take the same function, whatever model you have, and then easily build a GUI around it that can actually handle batch large volumes of data. Of course, this is obviously a very important use case, in a lot of different settings, and so we want to, and like a lot of repeated work happens in making these applications in a lot of different contexts. So we're talking to folks right now on how to handle like bigger volumes of data. What do those use cases look like? And so if you want something like this, like what Gradio does, but for bigger volumes of data, reach out to me. Definitely would be happy to chat. We're thinking about how to implement that.
Yeah. Awesome. That actually segues into like another question, which would be like, if you're operating in a say enterprise context, a lot of the time there's questions of security. So like, maybe I need to put like a password on my application. Do you have any plans to support these features, or maybe you do already?
Yeah. So we do offer authentication. So with one extra parameter in the launch method, auth equals, and then you can specify like username, password. So you can definitely do that. And people do that all the time. I think the very common use case that we see is people want an on-premise type solution or something that runs entirely on their VPC. So like the Gradio servers are not included at all. And for something like that, we offer something called Gradio Private, which is essentially kind of, you can think of an on-premise version of Gradio, and we work with enterprises, different companies to make that happen. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. There's another question we have here. So Gradio looks great for people who know how to code. Do you have plans to make it even simpler for people who don't?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we actually, so that is a really good question. I at this point, I think the general kind of assumption that we have is that people who are using Gradio, right, do have some kind of familiarity with basics of Python, and we just want to make that a lot easier for people to be able to build these front end, applications. The idea is that Python, but you might not necessarily know these front end applications, front end languages, web scripting, and so on. Mm-hmm. As of now, I think we'd have to think pretty deeply about what that kind of use case looks like. That sounds interesting. Making it completely kind of drag and drop and all that. That could be interesting. We don't currently have plans, but we can definitely think about that more. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, like I think the whole like no code like sort of like domain, it's a kind of a tricky one because like on the one hand you want to empower domain experts to like actually say build their applications, but then if you think about it, like what does it mean to build an ML application? And then you have this whole like knowledge that you sort of implicitly assume of the end user, like what is a model, what is a prediction, and metrics, all this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
And I think, it's not quite clear like where the level or the, the entry point is. For this kind of thing.
Absolutely. Exactly. So we'd have to definitely think about that a little bit more, but it's definitely intriguing. Yeah.
Cool. There's maybe one last question I've seen on the forums, which is kind of a bit related. So will Gradio come out as a friendly desktop interface in the future? Sometimes the model can't be used publicly, but is instead used internally in a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where I think the Gradio Private that I mentioned, briefly can be useful. I think web interfaces is fine as long as it's running, either locally or on your internal network, which is what Gradio Private aims to do. So if that sounds interesting, or if that doesn't cover kind of the secure need or the internal need, I'd be happy to hear more. But yeah, we work with a bunch of companies to actually do this internal use case. Even like folks that are doing medical, very sensitive data, and everything just works, internally, and everything's encrypted. So usually that satisfies that constraint. But it's a good question. I'd definitely love to hear more from this particular user. So feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you.
I think we're done, right? So last words before you head off?
No, thank you so much. We're working on a lot of very exciting integrations, the Hugging Face specifically. I mean, there's just such a natural kind of integration there with spaces and so on. So really appreciate you guys, inviting me over, and good luck. Enjoy the rest of the event to all the viewers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks.
Bye, Becca.